This session is a perspective from government. We have three speakers, chaired by Richard Sheldrake. Richard is, of course, a member of the ATSE board and an ATSE fellow. As you can see on the screen, we've got Professor Hugh Darrant-White, New South Wales Chief Scientist and Engineer, Adam Kopp, the CEO of Infrastructure Australia, and Professor Scott Sleep, from a STEM curriculum advisor from the New South Wales Department of Education. And I understand, Scott, you've been dragged away from a love-in in the Hunter, so we're grateful that you came.
Thanks, George. So this session's called the Government Overview, but I think that's a bit Putin-like, really, for a session here today. So, I mean, what we're going to talk about largely is going to be around skills. It's a topic that's been covered initially with Mary earlier this morning, both panel sessions. And it's about the skills required in contemporary engineering, the skills in the pipeline of infrastructure, and then the skills and in terms of education, which has just been dealt with and handled quite eloquently in the last session. So we've got a fantastic panel to handle those. We're going to handle it a little bit differently to the previous two sessions. Hugh is on a tight timeline, so we're accommodating Hugh by putting him up first. And what we're going to do is let Hugh go on for as long as he wants to, then take questions and answers, and then similarly with Adam will speak. We'll take questions and answers from Adam, and then Scott at the end. So a little bit different, but I think it'll work perfectly. So over to you, Hugh. Thanks very much. And you've got 15 minutes.
Yeah, I won't take 15 minutes. Don't worry, I don't go on and on and on. I guess I'm going to try and make two general points, and my focus is very much what happens when we get graduates and where they go and what they do and so on. So, I did the numbers. It's interesting, actually. We have about 25,000 engineers enrolled in New South Wales at any one time. Intriguingly, which surprised me, I have to say, we actually have about 25,000 computer scientists. So computer science is now as big as all engineering, which I think is interesting. We also have 40,000 scientists, all right, enrolled at any one time. So that, if you like, is our cohort of people who are graduating in the STEM areas in general. I think the other thing that's interesting, and I'm going to come back to those numbers in a minute as well, is what happens to them. Well, only about 60% of engineers actually go into a profession that uses their degree. So we lose 40% of people who are qualified in engineering. They go to NAB and other places, okay? So don't get me wrong, I think the ability to do maths is probably useful if you're a banker, but nevertheless, we lose quite a lot of people. I think, interestingly, in the science area, we actually only 40% of people in science go on to use their degree in their profession, all right? So again, we lose 60% of people in that area, and I think that's pretty astonishing as well. And to the comment that was made earlier as to why we don't graduate more engineers and scientists, arguably I would posit the answer is we don't actually have a sophisticated enough industry sector to absorb even the STEM graduates that we currently produce, and I think that's a challenge. So my first point is a little slightly different from that, and I'm going to just come to the main point. When I look back at my career, and I was having a very interesting conversation with Jane McMaster a couple of months ago about what the future of training in engineering is and so on, I look back, and of course I was a nuclear engineer when I originally graduated a long time ago, worked on nuclear submarines. It's going to become popular again. I feel like I've done a full circle. I then went into robotics and then into computer science, and then I went and did things in defence, and then I went and did things in whatever. And when I think about chief scientist, I do rivers and forests, I do precincts and roads and rail, I do renewable energy, I do chemistry, I do decarbonisation, I do digital technologies, I do synthetic biology, I do quantum, you name it, I do it. And I think this is what's really changing. We are no longer teaching electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, or whatever else it is. We are teaching technology in general, all right? And when I think about it, I think about kind of T-shaped, I think the expression is T-shaped skills, technology-shaped skills, right? Where we have some depth in some area and we have a lot of breadth. And when I work with companies, and I work a lot, for example, with companies like Rio Tinto, I find myself going in and actually training chemical engineers to do data science. I find myself going in and training data scientists to do chemical engineering. And I find a lot of the fact that what we're trying to deliver is total systems. You know, I mean, there's this smile curve, I think, in manufacturing where, you know, the real input, truthfully, is in the ability to design and integrate and bring all these things together. Medical devices, I can see you there, Jim, is a lot about how you bring electronics, mechanical, health, and everything all into one integrated package. And we don't train people to do that, which is I find very interesting. I, in fact, go back and think to myself, my PhD was actually in systems engineering, not in any particular discipline. And I think, again, that's reflective of where we're going. So when I think about what's happening here, the 2 points are the following. Actually, arguably, we've got enough STEM graduates, all right? They may not be well-rounded enough, good enough, and I'll bring up the maths problem again, you know, mathematically able enough and so on to really deliver the kinds of things that we need in a modern society. And modern society now is driven by digital. It's about an ability to add value, to analyze, to do a range of different things. And I think that is a big issue that we actually have to do. But at the same time, we're not really training people, I'm a bit wary about this, training people to genuinely be engineers. And engineers are people who make things that work, all right? And making things that work is an ability to bring all of those things together, all right? And genuinely build things someone wants to buy or use or whatever. And we're not good at that. So I see the future kind of the engineering skilled workforce and the lack that I see out there in industry. And don't get me wrong, even mining companies, when they get rid of all their mining engineers, the problem is mining companies don't need mining engineers anymore. They actually need computer scientists and they need roboticists and they need people like that, right? What they're actually looking for are indeed skills in mathematics. You know, they genuinely need people with those core skills in computing and the use of computing in design and building products and building systems and how you integrate technologies, whether you're in the civil domain or indeed whether you're in chemical or engineering technologies or anything else, medical devices. And again, I would posit that we do not really offer a training program in any of those areas. And perhaps, you know, first step in this would be perhaps to better integrate computer science and engineering, you know, into an integrated discipline in general. I also think, and this is something Jane and I talked a lot about, and again, maybe I'm just going back to my old self, we actually need to start training systems engineers, you know, people who are actually capable of integrating products together, integrating systems together, you know, whether it's logistics hubs, mining organizations, medical devices, all of these things that really kind of make things happen, where we can actually deliver systems and products. And again, I reflect on where undergraduates go and where my old undergraduates go and where they've been successful. Actually, it's not in big companies. It's not in the, frankly, the Rio Tintos, you know, or any of these things. It's in the 200-person companies who are doing synthetic biology, new types of meat, quantum technologies, new pieces of technology, design. You meet these fantastic companies. I met one in North Sydney a couple of months ago who's the world expert in designing yeast. All right, we happen to be good at these sorts of things, and that's really where our opportunities rise, and that's really where we need to be kind of getting our graduates and sending them to these things. I also think at the same time we are missing, there was a word about it, job ready, I mean, I can't remember exactly the right word for it, but basically on you know, in industry training. You know, when I look back at where I've seen undergraduates benefit from training in companies, it's actually not truthfully been in the technical areas, you know, reading up the manual, how to operate a particular piece of machinery or figuring out how you operate things. It's genuinely about how you build products, how you manage products, how you be entrepreneurial, how you actually genuinely work as part of a company, all right, rather than in the traditional things. Now, it's not easy to teach that kind of stuff. In fact, I would go far enough to say that you can't teach that sort of stuff. It is exactly the area where we should be engaging in these sorts of things. And I would advocate, truthfully, a much broader engagement, but with, if you like, the smaller company sectors and not the bigger company sectors in these sorts of areas to really drive that kind of experiential training and the importance, I think, of thinking beyond just the engineering. So I might stop there. I didn't go on for 15 minutes.
No, I think that's great. Okay. Let's take some questions of Hugh while we've got him. Questions? Peter.
Thanks, Hugh. That last comment that you're getting onto about the companies are more likely to be 200 employees or less opens up to me what I think is a wonderful opportunity that the universities and others should be taking into account, and that is collectives of SMEs. And if there's any doubt about what I mean by that, I don't know if Megan's still here, but I talked to Megan about doing this 20 years ago. Hasn't happened, don't know why, but maybe it's time for government and others to address it. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Another question? Mark Hoffman.
Hugh, you always give some what you're looking quite straight. It's not a tricky one. You spoke about the type of education that engineers receive, and that is certainly a piece. But on the other side, we've got a situation where we don't have enough people coming into the system. The pipeline coming into the engineering education is where the struggle is, which then brings more challenge to actually, I suppose, diversifying the type of could bring more challenges to diversifying the type of engineer that you're looking for, which is essentially one who's really good at computer science, really good at mechanical, really good at those sorts of areas, even though they're quite broad. Within that context, how are we going to increase the volume of engineers when we're also simultaneously trying to change what we're teaching them?
Well, every bug is a feature, right? I think first I would genuinely have to reiterate my hypothesis, which is I suspect we actually have enough engineers. So it's just we're not using the ones we've got. But I would say the T-shaped skills are an opportunity, right? Because, the stem of the T, and I look at a lot of these companies now, could be in biology, all right? You look at the companies doing synthetic meats, artificial proteins, all of these things, which are quite big manufacturing concerns now in New South Wales, right? Which is the depth. But, amongst the breadth of how do we build a system, how do we genuinely understand the mathematics of distillation and crystallization and so on. So you can bring in people from other areas to be engineers, in my view. I might, again, controversially put something out there. I think one of the things that limits our vision of what engineering could be, truthfully, is the fact that we currently accredit via Engineers Australia through very, very narrow guidelines.
Well, that's not controversial, is it? Okay. Is there another question? Yes, John, and then Mary, and then we'll wrap it up for you. John?
Yeah. Thanks, Hugh, for your excellent presentation. I'm actually a member of the Faculty Advisory Council for the University of New South Wales, and I've also been involved via our son with the University of New South Wales Founders Program, which is about, of course, about identifying and trying to teach some of those basic skills for entrepreneurship. My comment is, my question to you is, Hugh, I agree entirely with what you said, that one of those soft skills, if you like, we need to somehow endow to our engineering graduates is that ability to start companies, to fund and start companies. Yep. Is that soft skill, which University of New South Wales Founders Program is all aimed at trying to impart to both students, mainly postgraduate students and academics, is that an inborn skill, or is it a skill that you can teach?
That's a good question. My belief is it's very hard to teach. You need to embed people in the place where it happens. I had a very useful trip recently to Boston, and I was given a tour of all the accelerators and incubators in the biotech space, which truthfully is no longer biology. It's all engineering now, right? It is the frontier of engineering. And it's all full of undergraduates, with companies doing stuff, et cetera, mostly on unpaid internships, but learning how to happen. I'd rather that happen than a bunch of academics attempt to explain how to commercialize stuff. Wouldn't you?
Okay. And last question from Mary, and we'll wrap it up for you.
It's coming there.
Okay. What you said about the companies up to 200 people, we should combine that with Bronwyn's idea earlier, Bronwyn Evans' idea about R&D tax concessions, on universities with the companies being involved with
Good idea. Yeah.
So what I'd like to put out as a challenge to the audience on how to design that tax concession system, and send it to me before Friday, because that's the thing. The second thing I wanted to pick up was your point about accreditation. And I feel that maybe I do have to leave in a minute, and it may be wise I do leave because I mightn't be that popular. But one of the things we have talked about in the Accord, not in the interim report, it came later, is that we should accredit accreditation bodies. So that, because at the moment, not of course engineering, but in some fields, the accreditation requirements, particularly around placement, are really onerous and are really odd and are causing perverse incentives. And therefore we wonder if one of the regulatory bodies like TEXA shouldn't be involved in providing guidelines and providing accreditation in some form for professional accreditation bodies. And I'd very much like comment on that.
Thanks, Mary. So I saw hands go up immediately when you asked for support. So I imagine a whole lot of material is going to come into your office in the coming days. So look, I'm going to wrap it up there for Hugh. He has to go, so please. That's okay. Thanks, Hugh, for coming. Yeah, absolutely. So Adam's going to present from over the other side. Adam Kopp, the CEO of Infrastructure Australia.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. And I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we're meeting today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And thank you for the opportunity to address the group here today. I think it's a really critical conversation. You can have all the concrete and steel in the world, but without the people with the skills to build it, we're absolutely nowhere. So I think it's important that we focus on this, and I think it is already a crisis, but it's really important that we don't waste a crisis going forward. So I'll just talk a little bit about Infrastructure Australia. We're the nation's independent infrastructure advisor, and we provide advice to the Australian level of government on projects and reforms of national significance. And we summarise our work into two key streams. One is advising specifically on projects that are deemed nationally significant, or where there's an investment of over $250 million of Commonwealth funding in water, transport, communications and energy. And the second is our policy and research work, where we identify gaps and opportunities to support government policy and reform. One of the major bodies of work we do in our policy space is our market capacity research. It's a significant body of work that helps articulate the demand within the nation's major infrastructure pipeline and the capacity of the industry to actually deliver on it. And that's across plant, labour, equipment and materials. We released our first market capacity report in 2021 after we were requested by National Cabinet in 2020 to look into the issues affecting the construction industry. And the way in which we do that is we work closely with jurisdictions. They share their confidential pipeline data with us that goes through a database and algorithm that we have. And then we provide back to all jurisdictions the demand across the nation, which they rarely have at that national view, and where the gaps and opportunities are. So I'll just share a little bit of insight in this presentation on the insights from our 2022 market capacity report. I'll talk a little bit about what we're seeing coming through in the 2023 report, which we'll provide to National Cabinet later in the year. So this slide here articulates the demand to build Australia's infrastructure. So we know that the nation's 5-year pipeline of major infrastructure projects stands at about $237 billion, and that's $15 billion more than it was in 2021. And that's from the major project infrastructure pipeline, so anything over $100 million in the larger states and anything over 50 million in the smaller states. More than 80% of that is on the East Coast. And New South Wales has projects in the pipeline worth over $100 billion, although I will note that there are a range of reviews going on in infrastructure at the moment. There's a New South Wales pipeline review and a federal infrastructure pipeline review to better smooth the demand that we're seeing on this slide. Currently, each of the states and territories plan to invest the majority of their budget on major transport infrastructure. However, we are seeing that starting to change and change quite rapidly into energy infrastructure as we gear up to meet our emissions targets with the new legislation that passed late last year. So in terms of the supply, a skilled and available workforce is critical, as I said earlier, for realising the ambitions of Australia's infrastructure investment program. But the rapid expansion of the pipeline is showing that demand to build is far exceeding supply. So labour demand for major infrastructure activity over the next 5 years is valued at $133 billion, and that is the largest total share of expenditure on projects. So across plant, equipment and materials, labour is the largest proportion. And looking at the available workforce specifically, last year the infrastructure sector faces a shortage of around 214,000 skilled workers. And this year we're expecting that number to extend to 226,000, so about a $15,000 people increase. So in New South Wales, the ratio for skilled labour in terms of demand is 2 to 1 to supply. This is the same story for most other jurisdictions, although Western Australia has the highest demand to supply ratio with 2.7 workers demanded for every 1 worker that they are available to be supplied. And across that demand for skilled labour, engineers, scientists and architects are acutely scarce. They account for nearly half of the total workforce needed by the industry. So understandably, the consequences of this unprecedented workforce shortage will affect every public infrastructure project in coming years. It's also important to highlight that female representation in the workforce is also incredibly low. The construction industry has the lowest levels of female workforce participation of any industry at 14%, and actually on site, on the tools, it's 1 or 2%. So there's a massive opportunity to encourage more diversity into the construction industry to better meet these supply and demand issues. One final insight from 2023 market capacity research, which we're currently doing, is that we are not seeing that the skills shortage is being exacerbated by new entrants to the sector not coming in at a fast enough pace. And I've only been here an hour or so, but I've just heard that for a range of industries. So 50% of apprentices and trainees who completed training for infrastructure-related roles in recent years did not join the occupation for which the training was intended, and 20% did not even join an occupation that is related to infrastructure. So we're doing more of a deep dive on why that is and understanding people's career pathways in infrastructure. But I think it speaks to a problem in the culture of the industry in some way. It's very well known that infrastructure has long hours, very male heavy, not a lot of support for diversity, and I think that is increasingly becoming an acute issue. And when you couple the skills shortage with the productivity in the construction industry issue, it compounds quite significantly. If you compare infrastructure or the construction industry to the likes of transport and manufacturing, the construction industry has not increased its productivity. In fact, it's slightly declined for the last 30 years. And there's been an enormous amount of digital and other innovation that's come through every other sector, and the construction sector has barely had a blip and change in its productivity. The way in which the construction sector has dealt with the increase in demand is to push their workforce harder and faster. So 64% of construction workers chalk up more than 50 hours over a 6-day working week, and those long hours lead to stress, burnout, fatigue, and poor mental health as well. So I have given a very broad overview of the lay of the land from our perspective. The issue is, how do we address these skills shortages and retain the workers that we need? I think one of the things that we have advocated for is a much more transparent pipeline over a longer period of time that gives a sense to industry, at least 10 years, a sense to industry about the projects that are very likely to be coming on stream. There will be small changes throughout, but the projects that will be coming on stream and the skills that are needed. Right now, there's a bit of a boom and a bust cycle. It's very hard to predict what the skills are, and as we all know, there's a long lead time in terms of getting the right skills in place at the right time. So currently, there is not a 10-year pipeline, a true 10-year pipeline in any jurisdiction. One of the recommendations we had from our Delivering Outcomes report was the need for the development of a skills strategy that sets out tangible and achievable actions to ensure training and education services align with the needs of the sector to deliver the pipeline. The Australian government has recently announced a forming of a type of collaborative relationship in this space with the establishment of jobs and skills councils. They're a network of industry-owned and led organisations that bring industries, governments and educational institutions together to tackle current and future skills and workforce challenges. They will specifically inform and advise the tertiary sectors about the existing and emerging skills needs of our economy. There's a specific council covering the construction industry, which is called Build Skills Australia and is co-chaired by my chair at IA, Gab Trainer. And it once fully established, it aims to bring the key players together to work through a series of ways to find solutions to these fairly acute skills and workforce challenges. So to wrap it up, we need to see longer term project planning in the nation's pipeline, stronger collaboration between industry and educational institutions, and a real focus on increasing diversity in the construction sector to help navigate the skills shortage. In terms of our report that will be coming out later this year, our 2023 Market Capacity Report, it will build on the data that we've collected over the last 3 years, and will also include an analysis of career pathways in construction and reveal insights where governments can potentially intervene to address skills shortages faced by the sector. And we'll be providing advice to infrastructure and transport ministers and National Cabinet on those issues. So looking forward to releasing the research and happy to take any questions.
Okay, good. We've got a chance for a few questions to Adam. Sorry, yeah.
Peter Lee, thank you for an interesting presentation, some really nice statistics. I'm really tempted to ask how close utopia is to infrastructure in Australia, but we won't go there today.
That's not the first time I've heard that one.
Yeah. What is Infrastructure Australia doing, I guess, to bring to the attention of general public the impact of the lack of supply of engineers, architects and surveyors, STEM-trained people, and the impact that will have on either traffic jams in the cities, on blackouts because we won't have the power lines, on the impact at societal level to the attention of the general public?
That's an excellent point. So certainly we advocate on this pretty strongly, which is why we take the time to come to events such as these or speak at events such as these. And when we release our report, do a full media strategy, I think that's a really good point around making it real for the public rather than preaching to the choir. Absolutely take that on board as part of our advocacy. Thank you.
Question?
Come on. Oh, you had a question here as well.
Oh, sorry. Lady. Yeah, sorry.
Oh.
Hi, I represent a project where we were looking to transition to renewables and be IoT ready. And when I went to the Smart Energy Conference, all I saw were rooftop solars or the big players. There's a huge market of people just not being met for infrastructure transition here in Australia. Did you guys not see that? Or, like, why is that the case? There's just nobody serving that market. We only use $1 million a year in power, so we were too small for some and too big for others.
Energy is a really big, complex space with a lot of other players that work within it. So we don't really assess projects in energy. We mostly focus on transport because it is a regulated market. There's no need for grant funding from government, but we have provided insights in our Australian infrastructure plan around that transition, and that advice has gone to government. But yeah, up to them, up to decision makers, right?
Yeah, hi, Jim Patrick. I may have missed the point, but in your plot of shortages versus time, you showed that the shortages dropped to about 0 by 2025.
Yeah, so that is a failure of planning in budgets. So the generally government budgets fall out to 4 years. It's the forward estimates, and then it doesn't go, like, they don't have the planning going forward from there. So what I'm trying to advocate for is that we need to have that 10-year understanding of what exactly the funding will be over time. But generally, governments only budget in the forward estimates every 4 years.
Thanks.
No, they won't. So governments are not funding. They haven't planned any further funding, according to the data that we have here, past the 4 years. So it will keep going in reality. But in terms of the data available, in terms of the budgets, it's going down. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Adam. We're going to have to wind the questions up there.
Can we
And
ask one more?
no, we're going to move on because otherwise, Scott's not going to get his fair 15 minutes. So you're going to have to save your question for Scott. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just on behalf of I'm here on behalf of the New South Wales Department of Education, but I'm a teacher and I know there's some teachers in the room and I've been hearing some of the discussions, particularly in the last section. And it was mentioned that I've got a conference that I put forward in the next couple of days, which is about developing the skill sets that we've just been talking about. And just in the time that I've been here, I've had messages and things for teachers who can't come to this conference quite upset to be able to get the training that they want because of the teacher shortage. So I thought it'd be remiss of me as a teacher not to put forward, it'd be great to have experienced teachers out there mentoring our teachers. We don't have them. I'm a passionate educator, you're probably picking that up. I'm in state office, but I've been going back into Maitland Grosman High School teaching an engineering class because they don't have a teacher. And if I don't, you're not going to have graduates coming through, Mark. So our teaching profession is stretched and we really need to put some more effort. The crisis that you're seeing here is a crisis in not planning. It's a crisis in the fact that we're not looking at that pipeline. I've heard pipeline mentioned so many times, but who is doing things in the pipeline? What are the practical things that are actually happening? Hopefully I'll be able to address that today. And like in the realms of that, we're talking about curriculum reform, and curriculum reform is happening, but some of these are not going to happen to 2030. What's distressing is we're now going and doing more reviews for something that hasn't even been assessed yet. So we've got to do less reviews and we've got to be more agile and actually put things in the ground and make them work. It is pleasing that we're looking at mathematics and we're looking at stronger links with career pathways, which is something that's been sorely missing. But I want to just correct something, and I've got to be careful here because there's an ex-NESA inspector here, but I'm for the Department of Education. So NESA do the curriculum development. They write the courses. Our job in education, Department of Education, is the delivery of those. So unfortunately, if you don't like the curriculum that's put in there, don't blame me. Our job, we certainly worked very closely with our friends at NESA to try to get it right. But in essence, the delivery, where I come from, is in the curriculum reform. So we're about developing the resources, professional development to help our staff to be able to deliver these so we can have quality education. In my particular area, I look after STEM, and there is 2 of us for 96,000 teachers. Okay. So, practical solutions. So, we developed this in the Hunter with a single school based off a defence program that happened in the Hunter, and there's a number of people in here that were involved with it. We developed the STEM Industry Schools Partnerships Program, and it is a collaboration with the Department of Education and many other organisations. It's multifaceted in terms of how it's delivered. So the key area here is partnerships. We are not going to solve these problems without doing it collectively. So New South Wales government, education, industry, universities and all that have to work more collaboratively together, and this is part of what we're doing. Looking at purposeful curriculum that can actually deliver the type of skill sets that everyone has been talking about in the room is what we're about. And we spoke also about the gender issues. Everyone's talking about there's a problem. Well, what are the solutions? And I know there's some people in the room. I can see Mike Myers there. I know he's part of the solution, and there are other groups in here that are doing that. But this is a structure that we have in New South Wales Department of Ed. And I just want you to get an understanding about that pipeline. We work, although I'm in secondary ed, we look in with primary. So I want you to have a look about, there's a video that just shows you what it looks like in the school and how that inspires students.
I like STEM because I really love problem solving. STEM is very encouraged at Cessnock High. They make it as if it's fun to learn.
We had to figure out what we had to do. It was like a mystery.
Something that STEM has taught me is that through working together and persisting, you can overcome challenges that you haven't ever solved before.
I think it's really cool when industry come into our school and like teaches us about stuff.
To be able to have a look at the working lab allows me the ability to see firsthand what I could be doing later in life.
And that's the point. We need to inspire our young people. The skill sets that we're looking at here are the skill sets that you need. Problem solving. Systems thinking has come up. How do we teach systems thinking? They said you can't. Well, you can teach systems thinking because you get students together working in multidisciplinary teams to solve problems. That's how you learn about systems thinking processes. Lots of partners that we're working with, always after more. But one of the key things that we've been quite successful with is iSTEM. Now, I mentioned before that our great colleagues at NESA create the curriculum. There is an exception. Department of Education now has department-approved electives. This is part of curriculum reform. So we developed the iSTEM curriculum that a number of people in this room actually helped develop, particularly Peter Thompson over there was the inspector that helped me get it through. So thank you, Peter. It was done collaboratively. It was originally designed for the Hunter region for the F-35 sustainment program in defence to be able to build the skill sets. So it's about developing those type of skills. So Engineers Australia were in the initial phase of that to develop these that are skills and provided us that information about what we needed to learn about. It led to the STEMship program in the Hunter that was identified as by the OECD as world's best practice. So it led on to other things that actually helped solve the problem. We're now only one of 7 subjects in the department to do that, but look at the topics that we're doing. You can see probably a little bit of the defence industry Hunter area, but it has evolved out of that. Originally designed for the Hunter, and when I went back into the Department of Education, this was done when I was working for Regional Development Australia, we're now looking and putting this across the entire state, and that's what we're working on because it's a successful model. New topics come in like cybersecurity, but critical problem solving, project-based learning, looking at the type of structures that we need, but also in the way that it's taught, using inquiry, problem, and project-based learning. We look at the STEM principles and processes, skills, the technologies, but more importantly, what are the industry links and pathways? So our students understand that they can go into different forms of STEM jobs and how to do that. So working with the universities, what are the pathways through vocational education and all those sort of information, which is sadly missing. Careers education is best delivered within the curriculum for the people that are actually subject area matter experts, not a generalist who doesn't know about the industry that they're supposedly talking about. And the most important thing, to be a STEM subject, it has to have a problem-solving aspect to it. So they work in teams primarily to design and use those skill sets. So these are the skills that we're looking at developing. These are the skills that are essential for engineering and STEM jobs. That is what we started with and worked out ways in which we can develop those skills. Looking at developing engineering principles and practices. So within this, we talk about writing engineering reports, doing analysis, research. We have a process. So this process was developed for and is being implemented across the state, where we're looking at an engineering design process. So when I'm talking about STEM, I'm talking about capital E and the other subjects surrounding it. I can say that in this audience, I won't say it elsewhere, but if you look at what STEM is engineering. And so does it work? These are old figures. It's when I was at RDA, but we did we did a lot of work just in the Hunter Valley. iSTEM was taught in 80% of the schools, and we tracked the data. So we're looking at massive growth areas in the particular STEM subject areas. If our Vice Chancellors want students, they have to be doing STEM subjects in high school, and we have to be talking about that in primary school. That's what's been missing. But when we did this, we saw a 19.22% increase in the subject uptake in Year 11, and when that was compared to the rest of the state, they went backwards. And more importantly, look at the figures, because we did specific programs targeted at girls. So in the Hunter, in those areas, you're 370% more likely to teach engineering studies in that area. We also have great support from the University of Newcastle, who provide opportunities as well for our students. And Hunter is traditionally a strong engineering area, but we're keeping it going. But look, software design, we've just said that industry is now equivalent to engineering. The physics and the high levels of mathematics has increased. When it is supported and money is put into this and we work collaboratively, it is successful. What is New South Wales Department of Education doing? We've just going through a reform process, and there's a curriculum reform area that I'm actually in. They've just put a new STEM leader in. There's an STEM enrichment coordinator position, which is brand new. There's 3 enrichment advisors, which were traditional. That's where I was sitting. There's 2 additional that are going to be housed at the Powerhouse Museum to the new Parramatta $100 million venue. And I have 10 STEM project officers that are all in regional areas of New South Wales, from Lismore to Wentworth, all over those areas, specifically looking at what has been said in here, looking at those areas that are most need. Our programs, 50% girls. 75 to 80% are from regional areas of all programs that we do, and the majority fall in the low socioeconomic groupings. So there are solutions, but we need support on the ground. I have to fight for funding every year. We have a 1-year funding model every year, and I've been fighting that for 7 years. So, and greatly supported by industry. But the department is putting structures in place, and we are looking at this as solutions. So thank you for your time, people.
Thanks, Scott. Great presentation. It's just a pity the speakers from the previous panel couldn't have been here to hear it. Except for our president. So I'll take some questions. Gentleman here definitely deserves.
Thanks, Richard. Thank you, Scott. Bill Cox from Oricon, and just applaud what you're doing in terms of that STEM education piece at scale across New South Wales. What insights can you share around what's happening nationwide? Because this is a nationwide issue.
Yep.
And the other question I have is, what's being done around the impact that parents have as one of the key influences, notwithstanding all of the great work that you're doing? Parents and carers have a vital role to play in terms of career choices, and that's a group that I sort of know that we need to influence. So keen to get your insights on both of those. Thank you.
Absolutely. So a lot of the programs are working are national. So I'm doing a lot of work in aerospace, funnily enough, coming from the Hunter. So on groups with the Australian Space Agency, New Inspire group, which is now connecting people like me with other people in other states. So we're starting to get a community of practice together in terms of who are the STEM advocates around the state. So we've got a program about to start with Western Australia, South Australia, Victoria and New South Wales. We have another program on a virtual program that in Queensland, New South Wales, now Northern Territory. So that's actually funded by the St George Foundation and is delivered by Department of Education. In terms of the parent piece, yeah, absolutely correct. The biggest influencer on students are parents. So we work a lot of our programs of trying to get the work that the students do and having the parents involved with it. So awards, competitions, getting the parents in with their siblings to be able to for them to understand the type of roles. Parents are the hardest group to get to and they're the most expensive. But the next phase of the most influential person is the classroom teacher. And if you have a look at careers advisor, it's not very high on the list. But when we're putting all our money into careers education, that's discounting the classroom teacher, we're doing a disservice to careers education.
Okay, I'll take
Careful what I say.
one more quick question and then we'll go to lunch. Don Hector.
Thanks, I found that very enlightening and energising. Is the success of the program I've got two parts to my question actually. Is the success of the program in Newcastle or in that area in the Hunter directly or indirectly influenced by a public realisation that the coal industry is going to be going in decline and they'd better figure out a new way to make money, as the coal industry, I think, did very successfully after the steel industry closed down. So I can understand there could be some real motivation there, and there's people with a long history of technical experience through the steel industry and the coal industry and the maintenance associated with that. So that's the first part of the question. Second part of the question is gross state product in New South Wales is centred very much in Western Sydney, and that's where the industrial base used to be and still is really. To what extent is your program aimed at hitting that part of Sydney so that you re-energise and encourage further investment in manufacturing and high-tech industries in Western Sydney?
Yep.
Quick answer, Scott.
Quick question. So the figures before were before the decline in coal industry in Hunter. So when you look at the figures, I don't think that had any impact on that. 20% of the Hunter is still employed by the coal industry. And the transition, I don't think the realisation in the Hunter is really there yet, of the need to transfer. You're seeing starts of it, but it's not in full swing. And in regards to Western Sydney, again, the Parramatta program. So we've just done a project with 6 schools in Parramatta. They've just come up with an experiment which is going to go on to the International Space Station next year. So working pretty much with hand in glove with the Powerhouse Museum's big expansion there, and in my the team that we'll have 2 officers that are going to be assigned to that, particularly looking at Western Sydney. So it's the first time sort of my program has actually is now reaching more into the regional into non-regional areas, but it's very much focused on Western Sydney, as again looking at that the area of most need. The CBD of Sydney doesn't have a STEM problem.
Thanks, Scott. With that, it's time for lunch.